Welcome to the podcast. I'm Angela Bobier, and this is Life in the Talbot Settlement, brought to you by Tyrconnell Heritage Society, operators of Backus-Page House Museum. In this series, we will do our best to give you a full appreciation of the history of Western Elgin County in southwestern Ontario, from First Nations to the early settlers to the 1950s. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge funding from Tyrconnell Heritage Society, operators of Backus-Page House Museum. Even in the early days, where pioneer life was all work, people found ways to make it fun. Working bees were a popular way of getting through big jobs, like logging and barn raising. Whole communities would come together for them. The men worked on outdoor tasks, the women would spend the day preparing food, and at the end, they would celebrate with a feast and possibly a square dance. For women, quilting bees were a great socializing opportunity. Beyond work, the settlers would celebrate weddings, visits from friends and relatives overseas, welcome new settlers, and of course, have holidays. For children, fun was found amid chores, and berry picking was one of those favorites. And of course, there were tricks. There's a spot in Shedden called the Ghost Hill, named for a boy who used to dress in a white sheet and scare the young ladies leaving meetings or choir practice. The ghost was dealt with quickly, but perhaps in the town's amusement, the name stuck. I am wondering if the ghost was dealt with quickly by his mother, who would have had to launder that white sheet that he kept taking. The fiddle was an important part of pioneer music, and someone would play it at most social gatherings. Aldborough's resident fiddler was called Old Black Joe, and was known for having just one leg. Most every church had an organ once it was established, and in 1883, Rodney had a brass and reed band start up. They were popular for a very long time. In the winter, ice skating was a favorite pastime, and communities would gather wherever the ice was thick enough. Sometimes they put on masquerade skating balls, where people would dress up like they would at Halloween, and enter small contests for their costumes and skating skills. There was even a St. Thomas Curling and Skating Club from 1877 to 1882. Events were organized by the church until the end of the century, when community groups like the Aldborough Old Boys Association, the Farmers Institute, and the Women's Institutes were formed. They would have regular meetings, personal projects, fundraising events in support of many causes. These events included, but were not limited to, fair contests, lunches and meals, concerts, plays, garden parties, bazaars, candy sales, picnics, and the ladies' choir. Youth of the community often volunteered for these events and were encouraged to get involved with the programming. Parades were organized for homecoming baseball teams, old boys and old girls reunions, the Rodney Fair, Victoria Day, July 1st Calathumpian, politicians, school fairs, the Declaration of Peace in 1918, and Wallacestown Fair. Another large part of 1900s entertainment was the Port Glasgow Dance Pavilion, built in 1921 by the Aldborough Old Boys Association. It is claimed to be the oldest dance pavilion on the shoreline of the Great Lakes. While it has been in use since its construction, the first formal dance was held on Wednesday, August 3rd, 1921. Music was played by a local group consisting of a violin, piano, and drums. It was a jitney dance, as most of the early ones were, which meant that people had to pay per dance. The price at Port Glasgow was 5 cents a dance. In 1937, they added 20 feet of floor space and a 3-sided promenade. It is still used sometimes today. And on August 28, 2022, there will be a 101st anniversary party organized by the municipality of West Elgin at this Port Glasgow Dance Pavilion. Now let's move on to the fairs. The oldest fair in our area is possibly the Elmer Fair, established by the Malahide Agricultural Society and now the Elmer and East Elgin Agricultural Society. In 1846, it was established to exhibit the area's agriculture and livestock. From there through the 1850s, it only had a few dozen exhibits, but it grew quickly, and by 1876 had over 1,700 exhibitors. These included the women's work exhibitions, which made up 1/6 of the fair. By extension, the Agricultural Society's numbers grew to over 200, and the fair went from an afternoon show to a 2-day event. Train excursions were even made from Hamilton, London, and St. Thomas. Unfortunately, due to disputes between the town's desire for an agricultural show and investors wanting bigger, fancier attractions, the fair was cancelled in 1910 and struggled to resume. This continued until the 1940s when the fair dedicated itself to war efforts. Even sharing 50% of every profit, the fair made more income in the war years than any other noted period. It has since continued to grow and thrive, and the area's residents are happy to continue their Elmore tradition. The first Rodney and Aldborough Agricultural Fair was in 1854, and it is believed to have been started accidentally by a group of cattle farmers trying to promote better herds by purchasing bulls to share amongst the community. The first exhibition was held the next year in New Glasgow, but there are no records of exhibits until the prize list of 1857. The fair was moved to Old Rodney in 1865, onto the grounds around the Stoddard and Stewart Mill. In 1949, the women's division was formed, although it wasn't fully amalgamated into the fair until the 1990s, which also introduced the junior fair and school fair. This year, the fair is celebrating its 168th anniversary. The Shedden Agricultural Society also formed in 1854 and started a plowing match in the southeast of Iona. As it grew, it moved north towards the train traffic in Shedden, but was eventually moved again to today's fairgrounds. It became 2 days of tractor pulls, agricultural displays, livestock shows, demolition derbies, children's activities, junior fair, beauty pageants, and more. It's more difficult to pin down exactly when the Wallacestown Fair started. The West Elgin Agricultural Society sponsored the Wallacestown Fair, or Elgin County Fair, in New Glasgow in 1860, but there are records and rumors suggesting that the fair had been running since 1853, when Elgin County separated from Middlesex County. The first president was James McKinley. Because the West Elgin Agricultural Society represented Southold, Dunwich, and Aldborough townships, a fair in New Glasgow was too far out for most people to visit. One controversy and some physical violence later, they decided to move the fair to Wallacestown, to the land of John Leslie Pierce. The establishment of the Canada Southern Railway in 1873 created a debate about moving to Dutton. The debate lasted 40 years. Remarkably, they held out until the age of the motor car made Wallacestown completely accessible, and in Wallacestown, the fair has stayed to this day. During the Fenian raids, the Canadian militia set up a drill shed and parade ground on the property where the fair usually ran. Those in charge were gracious enough to let the fair continue using the property once a year. As the raids ended in 1849, the 5 acres was bought out by the fair, and the drill shed was officially purchased from the government in 1900 for a whopping sum of $5. Other land purchases in 1875, 1904, and 1937 brought the grounds to today's 20.34 acres. From the beginning, livestock, produce, baking, and handicrafts competitions were very popular. Early exhibits also included working oxen races, an event updated to showcase new technology as farm machinery was revolutionized. The introduction of a quarter-mile track led to horse trotting races. Money was initially handled by John L. Pierce, who kept the money at home rather than trusting one of the area's few banks. He would be escorted from his house to the fair by a group of his friends. The fair couldn't meet expenses with admission money, so like many community history and entertainment sites, they relied upon subscriptions, government grants, township and county council payments, and donations from folks and firms. David Bobier and John McFarland gave out so many loans to people in support of the fair that they eventually took over fundraising. The fair was made to encourage and share methods of improvement for farming and livestock, but the growth of the fair depended on entertainment. Musical tradition started with a piper at the first fair, now becoming full-on evening concerts. Punch and Judy puppet shows were very popular, a series of puppet skits like a cross between a sitcom and a 90s cartoon. Before the arrival of midways, they had a popular merry-go-round. A variety of races optimized the use of the track, including horse trotting races, bike races, potato bag races, Shetland pony races, greyhound races, and chariot races. There was also a tug-of-war in 1901, automobile demonstrations in 1912, World War I airplane rides in 1919, the first plowing match in 1924, and milking contests. In the second half of the 1900s, buildings, gates, hydro, washrooms, fences, and community facilities for sports have been added, maintained, and updated. The track, fencing, and accessibility features of buildings have been key updates. There's also been the construction of a portable stage, which is used by the fair and many community members. And in the last few years, a pavilion has been added and named for a Victoria Cross recipient, Ellis Wellwood Sifton. Each of the fairgrounds we've discussed today still take a lot of work to maintain the grounds, plan the events, fundraise for everything, especially in the last few years. That is why it is so important to show up and support your local fair this fall by volunteering, donating, putting in exhibits, or simply participating as a visitor, in the hopes that these fun traditions will continue for many years to come. I'd like to thank Patience Boyd for writing the script for this episode, and of course thanks to our super producer, Katlyn Reintsma. Share your most favorite fair memory with us by emailing Angela at Backus-Pagehouse.ca. Come back in 2 weeks to find out about death and burial practices in the Talbot Settlement. Thank you for listening. Please share the podcast with your friends and follow us on all social media platforms at Backus-Page House. The Backus-Page House Museum and Tyrconnell Heritage Society acknowledges the land we are on today as the traditional territory of First Nations people. As settlers at a settler-focused museum, we value both the significant historical and contemporary contributions of all Original peoples and ask how we can be supportive in Indigenous cultural renewal. Life in the Talbot Settlement is a production of Tyrconnell Heritage Society, operators of Backus-Page House Museum. Your host has been Angela Bobier, music provided by Jack Witmer, and thanks to our producer, Katlyn Reintsma. To make a charitable donation, become a Tyrconnell Heritage Society member, and to contact the Backus-Page House Museum, please visit our website, www.backuspagehouse.ca. Thank you again for listening.